Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I'm just sitting here drinking my morning coffee. Getting ready to do some squats and everything. I had someone ask me a couple days ago, hey, are you training fasted because you're sitting here drinking coffee saying you're getting ready to do squats? No, guys, I don't train fasted. When I tell you guys that you shouldn't lift weights fasted, doesn't mean that I go and do something I tell you guys not to do. No. I drink coffee first. I get woke up. Then I eat some breakfast. Then I go squat. I sometimes might not even squat for an hour or two after I make this first video. But I had a subscriber ask a question on the Facebook fan page, and I'll flip it in here. And he said, "Howdy, Jason. I just wanted to thank you for your hard work in delivering such informative content. You never disappoint." You're most welcome. Thank you for appreciating it. One thing I really appreciate is how you have brought awareness to the importance of protecting our connective tissue. As a 47-year-old who is following the Strong Lifts 5x5 program, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on lifting heavy and how to protect our joints and connective tissue for the long run. Should I start lifting lighter weights and increasing my reps? Should I put more emphasis on the stretching routine? Okay, thanks much for your input. Best regards, Tommy. I'm going to give a controversial answer here. My observation over the years is I've been in the iron game about 20 years. No, and by the way, for the record, guys, people say, you've been lifting continuously for 20 years? You've been abusing anabolics for 20 years? And you look, it's like, no, guys, no. I'm not even abusing anabolics now in my 40s. No, guys, I had a 4-year gap from training. Remember, I spent a year in bed sick, medical doctor orders not to train for 4 years. I had to rebuild in my mid-30s. I had to learn to walk again. I had to learn to squat holding onto the back of a chair to get my first body weight squat. I couldn't even squat my own body weight. Okay, so no, this hasn't been uninterrupted training. But the point is, I've been observing this a long time. And you know what? You know who I agree with on this? This is one of the things that I think is interesting. This is why I pay attention closer to guys like Ripto. The reason is, my anecdotal observations over the years match a lot of what his do for older lifters. And this is a guy who has trained thousands of middle-aged and older lifters to get as strong as they can. I agree with him on this stuff. And some of those points are going to be, the older you get, the more difficult volume becomes on your connective tissue and joints. We're not talking about younger lifters. A lot of people will say, well, a lot of younger guys can do really high rep isolation movement to help with tendonitis. Every single guy I know over their 40s, especially over their 50s, who I've ever seen in the gyms over the years, who does a lot of high rep isolation work, their elbows and stuff hurt all the time. They have tendonitis issues, and half of them wear wraps and stuff. In fact, last gym I was training at, there were some relatively big dudes up in their late 40s. A couple of them who had jacked arms and everything. They didn't necessarily have lower bodies, and they thought deadlifts and squats were crazy. But, they were always doing cable work and high rep stuff for their arms, and they always seem to need elbow sleeves. They need elbow sleeves. In my experience, no, high reps are not the way to go. What you have to focus on is careful selection of your compound movements, meaning joint health becomes more critical as we get older as lifters. We have less leeway on certain things. And like we would say, there are situations in which, say, heavy partials might be useful. For the middle-aged and older lifter, I don't think they are. In fact, the older we get, the more we have to step back and say, okay, is this compound lift I'm picking, does it evenly distribute the weight better across the most joints in the body? In other words, you can lift heavy, you can hit maxes, you can compete in powerlifting, but exercise variations need to be focused more on even distribution of the load. You've got to start looking at leverages more. Perfect example for those who don't understand. Compare a low bar squat with a high bar squat. Not even high bar, how about front squats? Front squats, the load is distributed a lot more onto the knees than it is onto the hips compared to a low bar squat. Right? So you need to be picking exercises that are as compound as possible, meaning any exercise that moves two joints is a compound. As we get older, joint health becomes more important, so we need to distribute any given amount of weight we do more evenly. So in other words, we pick the bigger lifts, all right, bigger lifts. We need to be careful of any exercises that seriously limit range of motion. We need to be training our joints under heavy load through the fullest effective range of motion. Again, this is why guys like Jerry Ward are tearing pecs as they get older. They haven't maintained their mobility with heavy weight. Heavy weight's fine. Heavy weight is fine. It seems to be volume or excessive use of individual tendons that tends to cause us to develop more and more tendinitis. In other words, you need to only be doing big pressing movements for your triceps as you get older. All the isolation work, you're going to get more easily inflamed connective tissue. So in other words, when I say that, and I don't mean, oh, we can do short rep bench presses either, because we run into the same problem. As far as evenly distributing load, when we start lifting heavier weights than we are capable of lifting with good technique, what happens? We're loading the joints heavier than they need to be. In other words, if you can only come down for a full pause bench and pause bench 300 pounds, and then you decide you're going to put on a slingshot, or you're going to do touch and go, and then all of a sudden you're putting 30, 40, 50 pounds more on the bar than you're actually capable of benching with good form from a dead stop, you're now loading the joints heavier than they can really move through a full range of motion. And over time, yeah, that starts to beat up your joints. Now, guys in their 20s can get away with that. They can get away with that. You get further into your 40s and 50s, you can't. Your joints and connective tissue do not recover as fast. So you need to be thinking in those terms. I'm not saying not to lift heavy. You can still compete in powerlifting without getting hurt if you're careful with it. But your exercise selection needs to be very, very careful. We need to be looking at every lift that you do. Can you involve the most muscle mass possible? Can you do long ranges of motion? Long ranges of motion. We need to be thinking in terms of training the joints to be strong under load through their full effective range of motion. In other words, never short stroking reps, never ego lifting. We need to start thinking in terms of leverages. Am I putting everything at a leverage advantage to lift the heaviest weights? Even the way you grip the bar on the bench press, you got to start thinking more and more about that. Hand position more on your bench press so that your wrists don't get beat up. Right? Avoiding bouncing weights, avoiding too much volume. You can lift heavy. You can lift maxes as long as they're with good form. And you distribute everything well. But yeah, we just can't do stuff that's just going to beat up connective tissue. You can't go running around doing a bunch of high rep isolation movements. They're going to tear everything up. They're going to inflame everything more and more as we get older. Like I said, stuff the guys who are 25 won't notice. They can get away with this stuff for days, for years, all the time. As we get older, you will notice more tendinitis. The more isolation work you do, the more reps you do, the more high volume you do. We handle heavy loads just fine until we start handling heavier loads than we're capable of lifting. Right? In other words, if you're cheating, you're cutting range of motion or whatever so that you're locking out with a heavier weight than you're actually capable of lifting, that's when you run into problems. That's where things like these slingshots, partials, all that stuff are not a good idea as we get older. Again, they can be fine when you're younger. We can argue their effectiveness all day long, but in this case, we're talking about joint health, connective tissue health. So again, exercise selection, it's fine. And I mean, Strong Lifts picks exercises that does this fairly well. I think Strong Lifts, you're doing what, like a low bar squat, you're doing a pause bench, you're doing a strict standing press, you're doing a normal conventional deadlift, and I think you're doing pen leg rows. I think that's pretty much what Strong Lifts does. That's fine. That's fine. Focus on good form, good technique, using the right leverages, not bouncing the weight. Not saying don't lift explosively, but pause work, full range of motion exercises, big compounds for heavyweight to moderately heavyweight without doing a lot of reps is really the way to go. And again, gradual progression. You've got to check your ego at the door. In other words, as we get older, it doesn't matter that on your progression you're saying, wow, I mean, that 315 deadlift felt really easy for my 5-rep peak set. I'm going to jump 10 pounds instead of just 5. Because, that's what a 20-year-old would do. As we get older, we need to start thinking in those terms of micro loading. 5-pound jumps on big exercises, 2.5-pound jumps on small exercises. Get micro plates. All right? Small increases in loading over time. We can't ego lift so much. And I'm not saying is at 47, even when you get to 50, hell, you might have a 500-pound squat. You might get to a 500 squat, but you're going to have to be careful to get there. Not saying you can't get big and strong. All I'm saying is you have to pay more attention to these things. And what a lot of people are telling you is actually the opposite. You need to go the other direction. It needs to be heavy, full range of motion, training for strength and mobility through all your joints. Right? And we need to be looking at those things. And you need to pay attention to connective tissue. Deload when things start to hurt. Deload when it's appropriate. If things are hurting, maybe adjust your technique more. Start paying attention. You know, if your wrists are hurting or your elbows are hurting or your triceps are hurting when you're bench pressing a certain way, you might need to adjust your grip width. You might need to adjust your bar path more so that you take that extra stress from unusual angles and things off your connective tissue and joints. And that's what we need to be looking at. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.